Welcome back to Face the Nation. We continue our conversation now with former Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, now director of Stanford University's Hoover Institution. What's your opinion about whether there should be a commission to look into the events of January the 6th?
Well, we somehow need to look into the events of January 6th. Look, it was a terrible stain on our democracy. We have a really terrific system. It was tested on that day. We need to understand what happened with security. We need to understand the nature of that test. The sad thing is, I testified before the 9/11 Commission. We also had the Iraq Study Group, which was another group of citizens, eminent citizens, who helped us understand what was going wrong in Iraq. And so we have a tradition of these citizens, these elders, if you will, of the country to help us through times like this. The problem right now is there isn't enough trust in Washington to get this done in a way that everybody will trust the process. We do need to know what happened on January 6th.
But it wasn't both sides. The Republicans blocked the commission. So it does seem like
the problem is there just isn't, John, there just isn't enough trust in the Congress right now. Because we have constant discussions about, you know, how am I going to simply push you aside and do what I want to do? So let's just recognize that we are not in 2004 when the 9/11 Commission was constituted and worked, and try to find a way to get to a set of answers about what happened on January 6th. I would prefer that this were not the case, but maybe we have to think about ways to do this outside of our electoral bodies.
As we debate how to look at January 6th, there's also a debate in America about how we teach America's history. You knew one of the students who died at the Birmingham Baptist Church. Okay. Explain for me how you see that part of American history, also the Tulsa Massacre and other parts of America's civil rights history, and also America's exceptionalism that you were tasked with promoting across the globe.
American history was in part shaped at its very beginning by this birth defect of slavery. Do I wish that the anti-slave forces had won out? Absolutely, but they didn't. And then we had, after the emancipation, we had Reconstruction, which gave way to Jim Crow. I was born in Birmingham, Alabama. I was 8 before my family could go to a movie theater or to a restaurant. I didn't have a white classmate until we moved to Denver when I was 12. So yes, I know America's troubled past. And that troubled past continues to have an impact going forward on how we see each other. When I hear the talk about structural racism, it really gives me pause. And it gives me pause because it doesn't tell me what to do. If we could talk about the impact of race on various aspects of our life. I have family members who were victims of sickle cell. That was an orphan disease for a long time, and it affected mostly black people. What do we think about medical outcomes that clearly are still disproportionate? Can we finally agree that our K-12 education system is really serving poor kids and minority kids very badly? Can we agree that we actually have a choice system? Because if you are means, you will move to a district where the schools are good. You will go, and by the way, the houses will be expensive, so that's a choice. You can send your kids to private schools. So those are choices. So who really doesn't have choice? Poor kids, and many of them are minority kids. So there are these impacts of race that I think are worth examining. I want kids to know about Tulsa. I also want them to know what that black community did to overcome that horrible massacre. I want them to know about 63 in Birmingham, but I want them to know that the mayor of Birmingham today is a black man who grew up in a poor community. So I want them to see the forward progress of America as well on these issues. And I want us as a country to do it together, because I don't want this to be black against white, my weaponization of my identity against yours.
And just one quick point of clarification. Your point about structural racism is not that it doesn't exist, but that the term itself doesn't get you as far as you would like.
Well, John, I've ceased to use it because I don't know what it means anymore. And I think it's become a barrier do I think that there are impacts of race that are clear in American life, absolutely. But, you know, the other problem with it is it sounds so big and impenetrable, as if we have to jettison the system somehow. And with all of its problems, having been all over the world and having seen how people deal with difference, I will tell you that America deals with difference better than any country I've ever visited.
All right. Secretary Condoleezza Rice, thanks so much for being with us.
Pleasure to be with you.
The full interview with Secretary Rice is available on our website at facethenation.com. We'll be right back with Senator Joe Manchin. We turn now to Senator Joe Manchin of West Virginia. Good morning, Senator.
Good morning, John. How are you?
Doing all right this morning. A lot of Democrats say that you are standing in the way of their priorities, and one of them appears to be the president. He said earlier this week in Tulsa, talking about the frustration of getting things passed, he said 2 members of the Senate who vote more with my Republican friends. Depending on how you see it, he was either being honest about the limitations on what he can get done, or he's saying you're standing in the way of his agenda.
Well, I think that was taken out of content, John. The president knows how the Senate works better than probably any senator sitting today, or as well as any senator sitting today. He understands we're a deliberate body because we're supposed to be a deliberate body to cool things off that come from the House. That's what we're doing. We're looking every way we can to bring this country together and unite the country. That's what I'm doing. And I think anybody, whether it be a Democrat or a Republican that's sitting today in the Senate, knows who I am. And I've always been about bipartisanship. I've always tried to work in a bipartisan way, and I've voted in a bipartisan way in the last 10 years of the Senate. So I'm doing what I have always done. Let's unite this country. We don't need to be divided any further.
What the White House would say is on an issue, let's say infrastructure, which is key to the president's economic agenda, what they would say is there's a way to do this with Democrats alone. It's the same method that was used to pass President Trump's tax cut. But you won't agree to do that. And since you won't agree to do that, it takes all of the leverage away from the White House. Now, in order to pass an infrastructure package, it requires 60 votes to get past a filibuster. So it's not just that you want bipartisanship. They would argue what you're doing is basically putting all the negotiating leverage in the hands of those 10 Republicans that would be needed for the president to pass anything.
We need to work within the framework of what we have. There's ways that we can move forward. Let me say this. There's been 7 brave Republicans that have spoken out. They have voted, whether it be impeachment of the wrongdoings of the president, whether it be for a commission. We have to continue to keep striving to make sure that we can get to that 10. And that's why we're called a deliberate body. We keep working towards that goal.
Well, I guess let's focus on those 7, because the argument is that the Senate has changed so much that the institution Joe Biden knew when he started in the 70s just doesn't exist, and that your desire for bipartisanship is a part of an older Senate. And people might use in furtherance of that argument a quote from you. You talked about the Republicans who voted against a January 6th commission. You said they were choosing to put politics and political elections above the health of our democracy. You called it unconscionable, and you said it's a betrayal of the oath we each take. Leader McConnell has said he's focused 100% on blocking the Biden agenda. So the argument would be, if that's their position, what gives you any hope that they're ever going to come over to anything that President Biden wants?
Well, I think that my Republican friends and colleagues see the deadlock also. This is not something they desire or wish. Why they haven't been able to break from Leader McConnell, or the minority leader today, they're going to have to dig deep into their soul the oath that we take and why we're there. I can say this, that I will commend Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer for agreeing in a commission that was truly, absolutely more bipartisan than anything I've ever seen. And they did that in the spirit of trying to get Republicans to vote. You can say, well, that failed, so we give up. I don't think you give up on the first try just because you fell on something that you know you did right. And I'm thinking that there's Republicans that know that the concessions were made was the right thing to do to try to start healing our country. We can't heal and unite this country if we don't know for sure what divided this country. And to have an insurrection that every Democrat and Republican sat there together, watch happening from the inside of that Capitol, should have been enough of an alarm of saying, this is the first time in the history of our country, anything coming close to this, even the Civil War, the form of government that we have was approached.
Let me ask you about voting rights, which is another issue. You have an op-ed in the Charleston Gazette today. Again, it's an issue you want bipartisanship on. When you talk about deliberation and the Senate's slow moving being one of its great functions, Democrats would say, while you're waiting for bipartisanship, what's happening in the states is 300 or so bills promoted by Republicans to limit voting rights, changes in the ability to overturn elections if Democrats win. They say you can't wait while that's happening in the states for voting rights to pass by a bipartisan margin in the Senate.
Well, John, we have two bills before us, okay? We have the Voting Rights Act, which has passed over 5 times in our history here since 1965 in the most bipartisan way. And now we name it appropriately the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. We can expand that to all 50 states. We can do so much more with that. And it's starting out to be bipartisan. I have Senator Lisa Murkowski from Alaska signed on in a bipartisan way. And we can work on that one, which truly does protect the voting rights.
But I guess, Senator,
Before the People Act is much greater.
If I could just interrupt, you know politics and how it works. Why would Republicans, when they're making all these gains in the state houses and achieving their goals in the states, why would they vote for a bill someday in the Senate that's going to take away all the things they're achieving right now in those state houses?
John, they achieved what they've achieved before they went thinking they had to make changes. Why in the world would they want to make changes that basically subvert? Because I can tell you, what goes around comes around. It could be more damaging to them, too. The bottom line is the fundamental purpose of our democracy is the freedom of our elections. If we can't come to agreement on that, God help us, John. And someone's got to fight for this. And we've got to say, listen, the divided country that we're in today, the insurrection that we saw January the 6th, if we don't try to heal that, if we don't make every effort and go beyond the call of duty, then what are we and who are we? We've been known to go around the world and promote democracy and observe other elections. What kind of credibility do you think we have in doing that today? So I want to fight for this, and I think the Republicans will fight for this and understand we must come together on a voting rights bill in a bipartisan way. You can't divide our country further by thinking you've given leeway to one or the other. And if they think they're going to win by subverting and oppressing people from voting, they're going to lose. I'll assure you they will lose.
All right, Senator Manchin, the sands have run through the hourglass. We're out of time. Thanks so much for being with us. Face the Nation will be back in a minute. Just stay with us. We turn now to the state of our economy with Bank of America Chairman and CEO Brian Moynihan. Good morning.
Good morning, John.
How are
you?
Very well, thank you. I want to start with the question of cyber attacks. There have been a whole recent number of them, and we've seen the way in which these ransomware attacks can affect the economy. How much time are you spending on this, and has your approach to it become, have the stakes increased based on these new recent attacks?
Well, in the financial service industry, this has been an issue for many years, and so I spent time on it, but frankly, the good news, we have a great team, and our spending a year has gone from maybe $400 or $500 million a year when I first became CEO a little over a decade ago to $1 billion a year. 2,000 plus people work on it. We work in deep cooperation with the rest of the institutions in our industry, but there's more can be done, and there are suggestions and proposals that are coming out to do more sharing of information, cooperation, speed, and things like that, which I think need to be looked at by the current administration and Congress and pushed through in order to protect more people.
Tell me a little bit about that. Speed in particular seems to be crucial in one of these instances. What more needs to be done?
Well, we were able to create a group called the ARC now. It was called the FSARC before, but that's a group of many companies that are inside the tent, so to speak, sharing information with people to write clearances, and that allows us to move quickly when one person is seeing something and share it with others. And I think that kind of cooperation is in the most critical industries, but needs to continue to be moved to more and more industries over time.
Let's switch now to the health of the economy. The jobs report for May was good, but not great. What do you see? You have a special window in on people's spending and their consumer habits and economic activity. What are you seeing from your vantage point?
Well, it's a couple key points about the economy. One is it's predicted to grow, the U.S. economy is predicted to grow at 7% this year and 5.5% next year by our team. If you think about that, the economy is now as big as it was pre-pandemic, roughly, predicted to grow at 2 to 3 times the rate over the next couple of years. our consumers have lots of money in their checking accounts. We think they spent about 65, or they have not spent about 65, 70% of the last couple rounds of stimulus. Loans are starting to pick up, and there's plenty of borrowing capacity. Companies have unused lines. And the spending by our consumer, which is $1.4 trillion so far this year, is up 20% over 19, and obviously a lot over 20. And what that really tells you is that you're seeing a 10% growth rate, which is a faster growth rate on a bigger amount. So the U.S. economy is really set to go with a couple key risks. One is supply chain dynamics that I'm sure you've talked about in your show. And the other is people getting workers. And that bodes well for the unemployment figure, which is starting to drop. And we predict to get in the low to mid fours by year end, which is a pretty strong recovery engineered by the work of the fiscal side, the monetary side, and frankly, private industry.
When you focusing on that 20% over 19, as you mentioned, 19 was not a pandemic year, so the spending appears to be one of the things that we saw during the pandemic is people were paying down their credit cards, saving money. So do you attribute that 20% to essentially what some people call revenge spending, or the sort of pent-up consumer demand that was out there?
I think a lot of it has to do with, and where you're seeing it happen, is really reopening across the board. And so while certain places, because the infection rates were different and they reopened faster, you've got a pretty universal application now. So even here in Massachusetts, where I live, you're seeing people be able to move about. So you're seeing the spending move to domestic travel. Spending is up dramatically. Car rentals, hotels, for leisure travel, not business travel yet. That'll probably be late this fall. Is strong, theme park bookings and things like that. Those are all very good signs. And by the way, it's shifting from buying food in the store to more people going to sit-down restaurants, even over quick service restaurants. So you're seeing that natural behavior, which is I can go out, I can do things, and I can sit down and eat dinner because, frankly, way back when I was first on with Margaret on this question, it's a war against the virus, and America is starting to win through all the great vaccination work that's going on. We're starting to win the war, and it's not over yet. We've got to be careful to get it done, but we're starting to win the war, and that's allowing the economies to reopen, and that's allowing the spending to take place.
Let me ask you about small business. Bank of America is the largest lender to small business. More than 400,000 closed during the pandemic. What are you seeing on the small business front, and what kinds of businesses are borrowing and starting to take risks again?
Well, the good news is you're starting to see in our smallest businesses, which is companies up to $5 million in revenue, we're seeing the originations actually exceed what they were in 2019 for the month of May. They're a little bit up in April. They're basically flattish in March. So you're seeing it come on, and that's really the reopening in those economies. The businesses that are doing the best are either service-side businesses like doctors, lawyers, and things like that. Really recovered quickly. But now we've seen the supply chain, the people supply into industry, et cetera, growing faster. One of the things we got to work on is continue the supply chain. And I think that's when we ask our small business, what's on your mind? In the fall, it was all about the pandemic. In the spring survey we do, which is millions of businesses we ask the question to, it's all about getting workers and getting their supplies so they have things to sell and manufacture to sell to their customers. And that's something that's straightening out, but will take a little time.
And do you worry about the backlog of people paying their mortgages, those who couldn't during the pandemic? What happens when they lose government assistance? Will they be able to pay those mortgages?
Well, the good news at Bank of America, it's really a thing of the past. At the high point, we had given customers, 2 million customers, the right not to pay. We're down to a fraction of that now, and it's going through the system. So I think even in all mortgages, you're seeing it come down. Oh. So I think there's a little bit of the world has largely recovered, but there's a pockets of things that just have to be dealt with, and I'm sure the companies will deal with them fairly.
All right, we've run out of time. Thank you so much, Brian Moynihan, for being with us. And we'll be right back. Vice President Kamala Harris is heading to Central America today. She's been tasked by President Biden to lead diplomatic efforts in the region to slow the flow of migrants into the United States. Senior White House and political correspondent Ed O'Keefe is covering her trip and reports from Guatemala.
Recent American history is repeating itself in Guatemala. 6 years ago, then, Vice President Biden came here to meet with Central American leaders in hopes of stopping the flow of migrants.
If we don't do this, all of us will feel the consequences.
Today, as thousands of Mexicans and Central Americans keep crossing the southern border, Mr. Biden is deploying his vice president, Kamala Harris. She arrives in Guatemala tonight to meet with the world leader she's discussed the issue with most frequently, Guatemala's President Alejandro Yamatei. What is she like one-on-one?
She doesn't hold back, which is good. She's frank. We're not on the same side of the coin. We are in agreement in the what, which is something. We're not in agreement in the how.
Okay. Yamate says increased border crossings have been caused in part by the change of administrations in Washington.
The message changed too. We're going to reunite families, and we're going to reunite children. The very next day, the Coyotes were here organizing groups of children to take them to the United States. We asked the United States government to send more of a clear message to prevent more people from leaving.
Guatemala is about the size of Ohio, with about 16.5 million people of all sizes. And most of them never even think of leaving this country. You've got really poor, really wealthy, and millions in the middle who simply want to find a way to live here, want to make it work, have no reason to ever leave. For those who leave or let their children head north, American politics never cross their mind.
We don't have water or electricity. We don't have any money to buy food.
Harris cites a poor economy, violence fueled by the drug trade, and climate change as leading push factors. But she's also raising concerns with the region's long history of government corruption. Yamate says that's misguided.
On corruption, who is the biggest corruptor? There is someone else more corrupt than a government of this size like ours?
King.
Narco-traffickers.
The president told us Harris plans to announce the Justice Department will partner with Guatemalan prosecutors to target drug traffickers and other transnational crimes. Yamate also wants Americans to stop grouping his country with neighboring El Salvador and Honduras, and what many call the Northern Triangle. Is that a fair description?
No, es un insulto.
It's an insult. Why?
Hay una equivocación en los Estados.
There's a mistake being made in the United States. They've always looked at us like their backyard. That's the mistake. We're the front yard, and if the front yard is bad, how will the house be? If you all take care of your front yard, how will your house be?
Si usted descuidó su patio delantero, ¿cómo va a estar su casa?
The vice president is scheduled to make a stop here at the National Palace on Monday, and on Tuesday she's holding meetings in Mexico City. But sorting out the roots of the immigration crisis will take far longer than the length of any one American presidency. John?
Ed, thanks, and we'll see you next week.